I remember my dad vigorously shaking me awake every single day in elementary school. The funny thing is, getting me to school on time was the last thing he had on his mind. After getting ready in the morning, brushing my teeth, taking a shower, I used to approach the breakfast table and find a crudely ripped out newspaper article, one that he sifted through the New York Times hours before to find, and a pen. Breakfast was spent reading the tough articles and underlining all the difficult words that I couldn't even pronounce. The car ride to school was time to practice making sentences with these newly found words. And if I couldn't make a proper sentence, my dad would stop the car a few blocks away from school until I could actually use the words appropriately. As frustrated as my half-awake self remembers this daily ritual being, the insights I got from those morning reads never failed to show up at random points in my life, in my classes, and on my assignments, and they really helped me do well. As I grew older, I started to take more responsibility over my own education. And for me, this meant reading more articles on my own volition, creating a library of articles that I thought were really fascinating, and filling up notebooks with vocabulary words that challenged me. I think that the most comforting thing about forging my own education like this was being able to do so at the comfort of my own desk. Here's a picture of my desk at home that my dad actually sent to me yesterday. And while my parents always complain to me about how messy, chaotic, and unorganized it is, I can close my eyes right now and tell you where everything I need to study properly is on that desk. My textbooks, handouts, pens, calculators, anything. That desk, in every way, represents my perfect learning environment, one in which learning is easy and readily available. Now I challenge you all to picture yourself in a classroom. There are a few chairs and desks, but not enough to fit everyone in the class. Your pencil is an inch long because you've been using it for a month now. The walls are a dull gray. In fact, they aren't even really walls. They're made out of recycled plastic water bottles that aren't even insulated. So the floor you're sitting on is bitterly cold. This was a scene that I walked into when I visited the Wisdom School in San Mateo, Guatemala not too long ago. And I was taken aback at the lack of educational infrastructure that I found there. I pictured myself studying in that classroom. There's no way I could learn material as effectively there as I could in the sanctity of my own home. This stark contrast between what I found in places like San Mateo, Guatemala, and my own home is what drove my brother and I to found and constantly work to develop our own organization, Global Project Hope. The organization was founded when we were both in high school with the mission of ameliorating educational disparities. Now, the first phase of projects that we took on were authoring and publishing children's books based on stories that our grandparents used to tell us. And the idea was really simple. If we can find a meaningful story, insert some complicated vocabulary into it, and make it into a children's book, perhaps we can help students achieve greater vocabulary. And for a while, we distributed these books in and around our community in places in need of educational resources. Eventually, with the help of our teachers, we were able to translate them into Hindi, French, and Spanish to expand our outreach to the more global community. One such community, as I already brought up, was the Wisdom School in San Mateo, Guatemala. Our Global Project Hope team took a trip there almost 2 years ago as part of an outreach program. And throughout the duration of our trip, we helped support the school's educational infrastructure by doing things like distributing both Spanish and English copies of our books, as well as introducing the school to different technologies, like laptops, projectors, and USBs. Now, while we were in town, we also paid a visit to the local health clinic that was responsible for providing basic health needs to the town's residents, things like wound healing and providing medications. However, that clinic was wildly inequipped. There were but a few rusted beds pent up in a claustrophobic room, and nurses didn't even have proper equipment to draw blood. The nearest hospital was 4 hours away. Clearly, health was everything short of a right in San Mateo, and getting sick meant leaving your daily duties, like going to school, for a really long time. And therein lies the next chapter of Global Project Hope. While as an organization we realize how effective education is in causing changes in students' lives, we know that this isn't the complete story. Health and education have a profound duality. If you're not healthy, you can't pursue proper education. And if you're not educated, you're more likely to make unhealthy life choices. This realization has driven and propelled our latest flagship effort to redefine the way health education is conducted, which is the crux of my talk today. In my home state of New York, mandatory health education is mandated at a state level, as it absolutely should be. However, sometimes this can cause problems. Elementary school teachers who have little to no experience with health education are often forced to teach health with little guidance. And even in schools with designated health teachers, the problem persists. In a survey our organization conducted of New York City schools, we found several cases where health teachers were fired over the past year for not really having done much. My brother and I sought to change this. If health is so vital to individual development, it should be taught effectively, with structure and direction. So 2 years ago, my brother and I made and tailored our own health education curriculum we called Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise. The main component of this curriculum is a workbook that we both authored that has several modules, including nutrition, bullying, sleep, hygiene, and exercise, all of which are incredibly relevant for developing elementary school students. Fortunately, we were able to put this curriculum to the test in the Freeport School District, which is near to my home. Now, in running this curriculum, my brother and I used the workbook material to teach students and also conducted activities related to the workbook's materials with the students of the class. And to evaluate the effectiveness of our program, we conducted a pre- and post-curriculum survey. And the results were really inspiring. Our health education curriculum helps students increase their knowledge in all areas by 22% on average after only 8 days of full instruction. And moreover, the post-curriculum survey was given almost a month after instruction had started, so students actually remembered these lessons for a long period of time. But what makes this different than what teachers are used to? Why did our curriculum work? Typical elementary school health education is rooted in rote memorization, so telling a student to memorize a fact, like, hey, remember to eat half a plate of vegetables today. In educational spheres, rote memorization is known as drilling and killing. By telling students such a high volume of information in rapid succession, you stifle their motivation to learn. And with little motivation, students dump all the information they learned in class as soon as they exit the door. Essentially, by telling students to memorize information, you're educating them out of their ability to reason, because there is no mental stimulation. There's no mental exertion when you have a word, match it to a definition, and tell a student to live their life by that definition. I think what's most concerning about rote memorization is that a high level of reasoning capacity is what makes us all uniquely human. So why is it that we're teaching our students to not use their reasoning capabilities? Now, by contrast, our curriculum employs 3 main methods to help ingrain ideas into memory, the first of which is problem-based learning. Now, in problem-based learning, students are not imparted facts, but questions, and nothing but questions. In fact, all prompts in problem-based learning are open-ended. And students are encouraged to engage in conversations amongst each other to come up with an adequate solution. In fact, problem-based learning first originated in med schools, and for good reason. Medicine is a constantly evolving field. Our knowledge of the body and medications changed from an almost day-to-day basis. So for a physician, it's way more imperative to develop a high level of problem-solving than to memorize outdated textbook details. Similarly, as we grow older, our understanding of health and healthy behaviors changes. From elementary to middle to high school, we start to witness a whole host of new situations. In elementary school, we see playground bullying, and in middle school, we see the dawn of cyberbullying. So it's clear that problem-based learning, whereby we can impart a healthy mindset onto students to tackle a whole range of scenarios, is the ideal model for a health education curriculum. But how do we achieve this in our curriculum? Here's a snippet from the teacher's manual of our health education curriculum. And on the left-hand side, you'll see a page from the workbook. And the way the workbook is structured is around one character whose name is Justin. And throughout the workbook, we put Justin in a whole bunch of different health-related scenarios. In this particular page, Justin has witnessed bullying in his cafeteria and is walking past and is acting as a bystander. The corresponding page in the teacher's manual has questions, and again, nothing but questions related to, for instance, what does it mean to be a bystander? There are no statistics, and there are no facts that need to be drilled and killed, only conversations to be had and ideas to be shared. Now I know what you're thinking. What happens if students end up discussing the wrong idea? What happens if collectively students agree that being a bystander is absolutely okay? And I think this is great, because it leads right into the second pillar of our health education curriculum, which is discussing wrong answers. Many times in our curriculum, students will discuss wrong answers for a long period of time. But through the questions we have in our health education teacher's manual, instructors can shape the conversation students have so that they reach the right answer eventually, seemingly all on their own. And when they do, the idea sticks with them even more because they were motivated to learn and were actively engaged in the process. I think in many ways, this relates very much to what my dad had me do in the car. Oftentimes, I wouldn't be able to make sentences out of the words that I just found, and I would struggle. But I would eventually get it right, and the more I struggled to make the sentence, the more the words stuck with me in the very end. Now, to explain the third pillar of our health education curriculum, I want to take a slight tangent and just ask all of you, how many of you have heard of the band Van Halen? Yeah, a lot of you, I assume. So Van Halen is an iconic band, largely appreciated for their riveting live performances, many of which involved dangerous pyrotechnics, laser light shows, and fog machine work. Now, before Van Halen would go to a venue to perform, they'd provide the stage manager with a huge manual of safety precautions to take when setting up all the props. And hidden in that manual was one clause saying that Van Halen wanted a bowl of M&Ms in their dressing room. And that bowl of M&Ms couldn't have any brown M&Ms. So what's with this? Were they neurotic? Did they hate the color brown? No. In fact, this brown M&M ploy was fairly genius. You see, Van Halen didn't have the time themselves to go around and check whether all of the props were set up safely. But by checking whether or not the brown M&Ms had been removed from the bowl, they got a good sense of how detail-oriented the stage managers were, and they could trust that the props were set up effectively. If they walked into a room and they saw that the brown M&Ms were there, they wouldn't even put on a show. On a similar token, our organization can't trust that the curriculum we've developed is accurately teaching students the knowledge that it needs to without testing for brown M&Ms or testing to see whether students are picking up on the nuances of each and every subject. And for this reason, after we conduct a workbook lesson, we always, on the following day, conduct an activity related to the previous day's lesson. And what we see is that students are actively engaged in this material, in conducting these projects, and are collectively able to recall much of the information from the previous day. And even when a few students forget some of the information, through collaborative discussions, they're able to fill in each other's gaps in knowledge. I think what's most fascinating about our health education curriculum and its three prongs, problem-based learning, discussing wrong answers, and conducting activities, is that all of them are sound even on a biological level. Learning occurs in the brain when neurons exhibit plasticity. And plasticity is when neurons increase in the number of connections they have to each other. And according to the Hebbian model for learning, which is the leading model for learning that neuroscientists have today, if we increase the frequency with which neurons talk to each other, we increase the efficiency with which they can talk to each other in the future. Now, if we put these two ideas together, we can understand how an idea, when tackled from multiple different angles, multiple different modalities, can be very effectively ingrained into memory, very effectively encoded into the brain, and also effectively recalled later on. So knowing this information, let's go back and look at rote memorization. In rote memorization, we're forming associations between things like words and definitions. The neuronal connection is singular. It's very, very weak. By contrast, in our curriculum, we're forming associations between ideas and experiences. And these experiences can be that one time a student got a question wrong in a class, or that one time he felt emotional when listening to his peer's story, or that activity that he conducted. The sheer amount of neuronal communication is very, very large, making encoding and recall all the more easy. So indeed, our organization has distilled an educational tool that really does work, and we can't wait to expand it to schools outside of New York in the near future. But what's the broader goal here? What's the implication of all this outside of the project that we've already conducted? There are some ideas in this world that are very difficult to convey. This past summer, my brother and I took a trip to India, where we shadowed a nutritionist who was giving a lecture on nutrition to childhood cancer survivors. Now, childhood cancer survivors have an incredibly suppressed immune system, so they have very acute dietary and hygienic restrictions. This nutritionist, however, was unable to convey effectively what these restrictions were. So halfway through the lecture, half of the audience just got up and left. It is in situations like these, where education is available but not effective, that the techniques from our curriculum need to be employed. And that's where Global Project Hope is headed next. With the right intent, insights, and techniques, we're confident that we can make any idea stick. Thank you.